This is a natural rest practice. Scott Kiloby describes natural rest as a mindfulness practice, really. We're looking to see and to watch as thought arises and to rest naturally with our experience. One of the hallmarks of natural rest is that there's no practice that has to be done. There's no method, really. There's no state of mind that we're looking to get to. There's nothing really going on in terms of expectations or a certain way to do things. It's a looking. One of the key distinctions that he's made in other practices is the difference between thinking and watching thought. For this next little while, let's do that as a practice. And the resting happens in the natural gaps in the thinking process. Even now, as you're listening to these words, notice what's coming up in your own mind. There's these words, natural rest. There's associations that are always triggered from whatever it is that we're experiencing. Some neutral, some positive, some negative. Some have hooks, some are pretty much sliding right through without us even hardly noticing them. Bring your attention to your mind as it is in this moment. And notice that you're watching thought form as it has a life of its own, and then as it stops and comes to rest. Notice that thinking is being observed. And that it's being observed in this environment of our body. There's the room that we're in, there's the space that our body is occupying. And right behind the forehead, there's thought that's arising. And that we're observing or being mindful of that thought. Notice that some thoughts have a lot of trigger on them, or there might be an intense or compulsive train of thought that gets going. If that's the case, we might wander off into a train of thought and not really even notice until something brings our attention back. And as soon as we come back, we just rest in that silence. There's always silence between thoughts. There might not be silence between individual thoughts. There might not be silence between individual thoughts, but between a train of thought and the next thought, then there would be a gap. When we're doing a practice of watching thoughts, sometimes what happens is that the mind goes kind of blank. And then at some point, a few seconds later, maybe the thought might come in, there's no thoughts here. Notice that what is constant and that doesn't change is the noticing, the watching. That some part of us is aware of our trains of thought, aware of the thoughts coming up, and aware of the gaps in between. Many of us have a almost constant stream of thought in the mind, and it kind of drowns out other perceptions. When we stop and notice the thought, and notice the gap and rest in that space that there might be between thoughts, then other perceptions may come forward, like a sensation in the body or the breath, a sound that you can hear. And then at some point, another thought will arise in the mind. See if you can maintain the awareness that you're watching thought. That thoughts arise, they have a life of their own. Sometimes they have associations, and you get a train of thought going. And then all of this is being observed. And allow that thought or thought stream to come to its natural conclusion. And rest for a moment in the gap or the pause between thoughts. There is a part of the mind that likes to keep up a constant running commentary on everything. Sometimes there's anxious thoughts. It could be something as simple as, I need to remember to go to the store later. Or it could be something complex. The mind has this way of commenting and evaluating and observing everything that's going on from a very self-absorbed or self-centered point of view. And that's just the natural function of the mind. It's not that there's something wrong with that. What causes suffering is when we get over-identified or over-involved with that layer of the mind and forget temporarily or sometimes long-term that that's one dimension of the mind. It's one dimension of our being. And when we remember that, we can take a step back. Notice that we're watching thought. And as a thought comes to its conclusion, rest in the gap, rest in the pause between thoughts. There is a purpose and a benefit in having a mind that brings in information from the environment and analyzes safety and what you need to pay attention to and all of that good functional stuff that that part of the mind does. The suffering can come in when we get too absorbed. So notice if you can maintain that witness or that observer, that perspective that you're watching thought, that you're not thought itself. Thought is rising within you and you're watching it. And then there's this natural rest or pause between thought, and that you're watching that as well. Sometimes there might be frustration or judgmental thoughts coming in. You're not doing this right. What's the matter with you? Whatever it is that's coming up, see if you can hold this whole resting, this whole watching and observing in an arena of kindness, of compassion. These thoughts, these habits of the mind aren't you. They're habits of the mind, so it's not like it's not you, but it's not all of you. And these habits of the mind are being observed and noticed right now. Thought arises. And there's rests or gaps in between another thought and another thought. Notice your whole body, your energy and breath. The thought stream that's being observed by a higher level of the mind. And that all of this is arising in the space that your body is occupying. And watch as thought arises, and then you rest. Resting in this perspective of observing. Noticing that we can rest even when there are thoughts, even when there are no thoughts. That resting isn't dependent on a quiet mind. And as often as you think of it during the day, step back into this perspective. Notice that thoughts are rising and that you're watching that process. And then we'll get carried into the thought for a while, and that's fine. And then we'll notice, and then we'll watch, and rest in the gap. When you open your eyes and look around, that now we're bringing in color and shape and a whole host of other associations. And that this too is a process that can be observed or watched, that we can be mindful of that in daily life as well. And to keep turning our attention back to this process and holding this in kindness and compassion. That a busy mind isn't a failure, it's just a mind with a lot of thought in it.